Dun 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 dun. That's the movie. Pew 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 pew.
Outer space, like this for an hour, my nigga.
For 2 years, you're like, holy fuck, what's gonna happen? What's he gonna do? What's he gonna say? Is he gonna be like, oh my god, you're my daughter? Oh my god, my lightsaber? Like, what's gonna happen?
Fucking gives him the... Fucking hell. He gives him the light, says, you know, God, fucking hurt my head. Ah, fuck.
Why is she so powerful? How did she learn how to be a Jedi with no Jedi training?
The way that her character's written in this just makes me look back at Force Awakens and be like, you know what? Yeah, she is a fucking Mary Sue.
And then he milks a giant lactating sea moose.
Right. What the fuck?
They disrespected Chewie.
The
biggest scene Chewie had in this movie was when he was about to chew one of them little niggas.
Yes.
He was like...
Leia in space! Again. What?
This movie. This movie. Are you serious?
So Poe wants to know, alright, what are we gonna do? But she's a strong, independent, purple-haired woman, and she don't need no man. So she's not gonna tell.
We don't learn anything new about him. We don't learn about his past. We don't learn shit. And then he dies like a fucking bitch, and it doesn't fucking matter.
It gets to a point where the main story is hijacked by a subplot including big, fluffy creatures that are being mistreated.
Phasma walks in from another door when she was standing right next
Yeah,
to
exactly. With the Lord of Stormtroopers.
I know. Where the hell did you come from?
I know. She gives some stupid line talking about, oh, you gotta save what you love, and then gives him a kiss on the lips. I'm like, where did this come from?
You take the most iconic character of the whole fucking saga, Luke Skywalker, and give him the most uneventful death known to man.
Nobody cares. I didn't care.
This movie took everything that you like about Star Wars, that you love about Star Wars, that you thought you knew about Star Wars, and it on it. And it on it again, and then it sets it on fire, and then it on it again.
So in the weeks that followed the release of Star Wars The Last Jedi, I had an incredible amount of fun watching numerous YouTubers hilariously picking apart Rian Johnson's, shall we say, problematic contribution to the Star Wars canon. I'm old enough to count Luke Skywalker as one of my main childhood heroes, and I'm still more than enough of a fanboy to completely understand why fully grown adults can get so passionate about such matters. So I thought it would be fun to join in the pile-on and chip in my 50 pence about the most Marmite of all the Star Wars movies. And in keeping with the theme of this channel, I particularly want to take a closer look at the most common complaint about the direction Disney has taken the series. It's a complaint that's become a reoccurring gripe in modern pop culture circles, so much so that I might even make this the first of an occasional series on that very subject. And if you haven't worked out what I'm talking about, then just for you, I've only gone and spent a $5 on a fancy opener to help spell it out. After 2015's okay-ish soft reboot and a very Empire Strikes Back looking trailer, I really wasn't expecting much from The Last Jedi at all. But in the interest of full disclosure, I should start by saying that it did end up delivering my most enjoyable experience in a galaxy far, far away since Luke Skywalker's heyday. Which is not to say that I thought it was a good movie, because it certainly isn't. Despite the instant sugar sensation of visual wonder, comedy, nostalgia and narrative curveballs, The Last Jedi is undoubtedly a terrible terrible movie. And I have a lot of sympathy with the view that, for my generation at least, it may very well be remembered as the film that finally killed off our favourite fan franchise. Some do appear to have genuinely loved it, but among those of us who feel left behind, a common complaint is that Star Wars has finally been put to death by PC pandering and an unnecessary obsession with social justice tropes. To be fair, it's been a boatload of bad writing and one incredibly bad business decision that's ultimately done for Star Wars, more so than some heavy-handed virtue signalling. But ultimately, when the sun is finally set on the third and final Skywalker trilogy, it will undoubtedly be remembered as the one that was ruined by social justice warriors. So in this video, I want to reflect on the difference between social justice and social justice warriors, why equality of opportunity and equality of outcome are two very, very different concepts, and the fact that just because large swathes of the media are praising The Last Jedi as a triumph for feminism, diversity and progressive values doesn't necessarily make it so. And I intend to do this by looking at just how badly the diverse and undoubtedly talented troupe of actors that Disney assembled were let down by the story they've been asked to tell, and in particular how one-dimensional, stereotypical, tokenistic and frankly terrible the female characters really were. And I'm also going to propose that despite The Last Jedi's 1-2 punch of girl power and mild misandry, the character that comes out of this shit show shining the most is, ironically enough, a cis white male. But before drilling down into individual character imperfections, let's take a moment to reflect on what some of its more generous critics had to say about the new series, and how Disney made the clearly conscious decision to lean in so heavily to the concept of social justice in Star Wars.
But I feel that this is what people want. The response from fans and the audience seems to be that this is what they like, this is what they want to see more of. And I do think that due to possibly the internet, people can be more vocal about what it is they want to see on their screens, and they seem to be saying they want to see something more diverse and representative of their society.
While they may very well be set in a galaxy far, far away, a Star Wars film will always, to some extent, be a reflection of the times in which they are made. And given the chattering class's current obsession with identity politics, it was probably inevitable that some silly SJW moments would creep into the mix. But right from the get-go, it became clear that a major part of Disney's marketing strategy was to set a course straight into the unpredictable and often unforgiving world of diversity riders and social justice signalling. Now, the ambition of attempting to appeal to as large an audience as possible is fair enough as far as it's fair enough. But the problem with this strategy is that when attempting to please everyone, you do very often end up pleasing no one at all, and in the process turn something that already had fairly universal appeal into something less, something forced, and something that kind of just looks a little fake. The theory goes that Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy is primarily responsible for pushing PC pressures and flying generals into the proceedings. And while that must be true to some extent, if the buck ultimately does stop at her desk, then it will more likely be primarily for taking the incredible decision to place Disney's very expensive new toy box entirely in the hands of one cis white male. Kennedy has certainly lent in heavily in favour of the diversity agenda, making great hay of the fact that 50% of her executive team and the majority of the Lucasfilm story group all happen to be women. And yet in a recent interview, Last Jedi writer and director Rian Johnson revealed that there was no overall outline for the trilogy, and that he was given full creative freedom to tell the Episode 8 story that he wanted to tell, which, if true, means that Kennedy and her team placed the fate of Disney's multi-million-dollar investments into 3 different directors and left any cohesive story arc to chance and to the whim of each director. Personally, I struggle to believe that such an insane decision could be taken at the centre of such a well-oiled machine, and it's also at odds with Kennedy's claim that the significant number of women in the all-powerful story group was inevitably going to make a huge difference to the kind of stories they were going to tell. Kennedy created the story group for the express purpose of maintaining a cohesive continuity and narrative across the entire expanded Star Wars universe, and yet seemingly Johnson was given free rein to answer all of the questions J.J. Abrams had set up in the first film, which is a terrible shame because both The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens before it both looked brilliant. They both sounded brilliant, and even often felt brilliant for at least as long as it took to take a breath and take in the bigger picture. And even though The Force Awakens was essentially a remake of the 1977 classic, it was also streets ahead of the soulless prequels, and did manage the not entirely unimpressive feat of keeping most of an extremely diverse audience reasonably happy, while most importantly, setting up the prospect that there may be better to come. So while my individual character criticisms do take in both movies, they are primarily informed by the incredible fact that almost without exception, Johnson dropped every single ball set up by Abrams in The Force Awakens. Or to more accurately mix up my metaphors, he came on the pitch, took the ball, and then changed the rules of the game entirely. Frankly, if Kennedy was prepared to take such an unprecedented risk, then she should really have put her money where her mouth was in terms of telling more feminine stories, and simply hired a female director and writer for at least one of the 3 apparently self-contained episodes. Granted, she may have had to fish in a less populated pool of experienced talent, but that talent does certainly exist, and a popular reason given for why so few women direct blockbusters is because studio heads like Kennedy never give them the chance in the first place. And besides, neither Rian Johnson or Gareth Edwards, who helmed the entirely more satisfying standalone Star Wars story Rogue One, are exactly long in the tooth when it comes to tentpole productions. Ironically, around the same time that The Last Jedi was stalling at the cinema, Star Wars' very own Queen Amidala was admonishing Hollywood for not supporting female directors. I say ironically because, as a certain Australian bear was quick to point out, of the 9 films that Natalie Portman's film production company Handsome Charlie have themselves produced to date, only one of them has been made by a female director, and you'll never guess who that was. Personally, I think that the Force is female mantra has been more than a little over-egged, and is as much a marketing ploy as it was ever a supposed seismic shift in blockbuster cinema. For example, while there was an awful lot of positives to be taken from Daisy Ridley's charismatic debut performance, her casting in the central role was hardly the game-changing feminist punch-in-the-air moment we've all desperately been waiting for that various column-inch-filling opinionators fell over each other attempting to claim. As anyone with even a passing interest in sci-fi will tell you, the genre has a long distinguished lineage of strong, well-rounded female characters, and so adding to it made perfect narrative sense for the new Star Wars, particularly given what had come before. But in fairness, at the time they were casting the latest Star Wars, they would have been seriously bucking the trend if they had actually opted for a bloke. And the notion that parents were apparently stressing that their 6-year-old daughter's obsession with the saga wasn't being fairly served seems more than a little forced when you consider that the main protagonist in its last cinematic outing was also female, as well as the 6 television series that Little Jedis have been leading up for the past decade. So while I do accept that SJW tropes in the new series are certainly part of the problem, I think that the real reasons it has bombed so badly with so much of the core fanbase are much more simple. Nevertheless, all of the excessive feminist fawning in the lifestyle sections hasn't exactly helped to ingratiate our central hero to most who might actually pay to watch her. Take this example from another Guardian analysis piece. The strong woman is almost becoming a trope, but Rey is original when speaking to women on a deep, deep level, battling through the galaxies with a less competent but well-meaning man. Constantly underestimated, maintaining the rage and the good humour, it's almost an allegory for women in the modern workplace. Such over-objectification and feminist fantasy ultimately only serves to project unrealistic expectations on her character, that somewhere down the line there will inevitably be a backlash from the very same column-inch-filling opinionators once they've decided that she has somehow betrayed the unwritten and constantly shifting code of sisterhood. They do seem to have stuck with her for the second film, but sadly time's up for Rey as far as a lot of the fans are concerned. Still, unlike poor old Anakin, at least this time around they can just dismiss us all as being sexist.
I don't buy the Mary Sue thing anyway. I find the term sexist in itself because it's Mary Sue. I don't think there's a thing called Ryan Craig.
So, for the uninitiated, a Mary Sue is a fictional character that is judged to be so perfect and yet poorly developed that ultimately the audience lose complete interest in them. They tend to be able to perform better at tasks than should be possible given the amount of training or experience they've had, and they usually end up upstaging all of the other characters in the story. The original Mary Sue character, written by Paula Smith in 1973, was intended as a parody of exactly this type of character, which frequently tends to appear in fiction written by fans, and has since become a well-established critical concept in geeky genre, used to call out bad writing and a poorly constructed character that is often a vehicle for the author's own wish fulfillment and self-insertion into the centre of their favourite fictional fantasy. It is entirely possible for a male character to be a Mary Sue, or sometimes referred to as a Gary Stu, and far from having sexist connotations, it is a term primarily used to call out one-dimensional, poorly written and overly objectified female characters in science fiction. Or in other words, everything that the new Star Wars claims to be railing against. I'll leave a link below to a video from Bandit Incorporated, who's done a detailed analysis of why Daisy Ridley's character had become a strong candidate for the Mary Sue Hall of Fame by the end of The Force Awakens. Her besting of Kylo Ren at the climax is the most obvious reason, but while Bandit lists plenty of other examples, he also pointed out that as a character, Rey hadn't quite reached the point of no return. Because so much of her backstory was still clouded in mystery, it was entirely possible that The Last Jedi would plug the gaps and in the process help to explain much, if not all, of Rey's perfections. Of course, in the end, Rey's superhuman ability to put her hand to pretty much anything is sadly one of the few of those metaphorical balls that Rian Johnson decides to run with, doubling down on her perfection and shutting down any meaningful backstory just for good measure. So just as she breezed through The Force Awakens, hoovering up all of Old Man Han's best bits, while also apparently making Chewbacca her personal bitch, this time it's Luke Skywalker's turn to see how things really should be done. Even though by the time we met him, Luke was already a pretty good pilot, it still took him quite a while to get to grips with Han's rickety old cannon. By contrast, in The Last Jedi, Rey manages 3 entire TIE fighters with her very first shot. And as for force powers, no problem. One lesson with Luke on Crabbed Old Man Island, and not only is she fully locked and loaded, but she can also pull out tricks those patriarchal masters of old could only dream of. Take this beauty from the throne room battle, where she uses force magic or something, to steal away a weapon just when her opponent could have put it to best use. By the time she's bested Luke at rock lifting, I'd certainly given up caring. But the worst thing about her journey is that the return of the greatest Jedi in the entire galaxy, sorry ladies, second best Jedi in the entire galaxy, is almost entirely wasted on a protracted build-up to an extremely quick but nevertheless effective lesson in being a badass Jedi. A lot of fans were especially annoyed about Luke's turn to the grumpy side, so for a little more on that, here's the excellent Mauler, who effectively points out the sole purpose the Skywalker character serves in what presumably is the last film he will appear in the saga that bears his name.
Luke has been gutted and poached in order to function as a springboard for the new heroes. He is the husk they will emerge from. Rey is better than Luke. She is more powerful, more morally righteous, more ambitious, more thoughtful, kinder. She's everything he should have been. But Luke actually earned those traits And now they belong to her, for free. No training, no tests, no trials, no tribulation. Luke has been provided a very classic case of character assassination. And it's devastating for long-time viewers because not only is it something that we don't want to see, but it is given no meaningful or developed reasoning. None of this makes sense.
As annoying and imperfect Rey's perfections have become, The Last Jedi could have survived them if Johnson had managed to get enough other things right. But the jaw-dropping thing about this disaster of a film is just how many balls he ends up managing to drop. And given the new Star Wars' mantra about respect for diversity, it's a shame some new characters didn't get a bit more respect.
We got 2 black characters in Star Wars. 3 including Saga Gerrera, and I don't think nobody connect with that nigga. But in The Last Jedi, they completely throw my dog away. The only character that I connected with, they completely throw my dog away, and he's pretty much useless. And you're probably wondering why I'm saying it's useless. If you take the scenes with him and Rose completely out of the movie, nothing about the movie changes. Nothing. It's crazy.
Rey's trajectory was fairly well set by the templates of the original trilogy, because not only is she Luke Skywalker, but she also gets to spend a lot of both movies being Han Solo as well. Finn, by comparison, is a little harder to pin down, which is why, with the exception of Kylo Ren, he was the most interesting aspect of J.J. Abrams' remake of A New Hope. By contrast, The Last Jedi wasn't exactly a carbon copy, but nevertheless it did borrow heavily from both episodes 5 and 6, which ultimately meant that Johnson had to make an entirely different mini-movie so that he could find something for Finn to do. And this is by far his biggest mistake, because besides from derailing both plot and pacing, he threw away the character that is supposed to be at the very centre of the central story. Obviously, everyone has an opinion about how The Last Jedi could have been bettered, so I thought I'd have a shot at my very first fan fiction in an attempt to illustrate why it's such a shame about Finn. Narratively, I thought that his role in the first film most closely mirrored the story of the droids. Most obviously C-3PO's blunder and cowardice, but also R2-D2's plucky bravery and technical usefulness. Star Wars may ultimately be Luke Skywalker's story, but part of its charm, as Lucas intended, was that it was largely told from the perspective of the underclass in the guise of 2 lowly servant droids, who, by the way, no one so much as bats an eyelid when they are literally sold into bondage and made to do Master Luke's general bidding. The most interesting thing about Finn is his origin as a stormtrooper, and it made perfect sense to explore this further and use it as a device to drive on the central narrative. I didn't buy his attempt at a cowardly exit, because he'd already overcome this character flaw in the first movie, but what would have made more sense if instead his arc involved a more complex struggle to overcome the powerful conditioning he must have been subjected to as a child. Doing so could have set a path that could have potentially fixed so much that is so very wrong in this movie. Indeed, Finn could ultimately have served as the main MacGuffin and travelled all the more interesting a path for doing so. A path that could have helped fix a lot of supporting characters as well. The movie could have started as they originally intended, with the more stylised and satisfactorily Star Warsy opening that for some reason ended up on the cutting room floor. He could have been woken by Phasma's condition calling, having triggered some sort of stormtrooper chip in his brain, which could have established a more meaningful long distance back and forth than Rey and Kylo's Jedi Skype chats. Phasma could have compelled him to betray the location of the rebels after they had initially escaped the First Order's clutches in the opening scenes. This could have in turn led to a will-he-won't-he inner conflict, which would give him a more satisfactory reason for meeting Rose in the life pod bay, Perhaps he was trying to escape so that Phasma couldn't exploit him further, only for Rose to unwittingly stand in his way. In turn, she could have learned about his dilemma and agreed to help him get off the rebel ship before he caused more trouble or his betrayal was exposed. Perhaps she managed to convince him that he could redeem himself by helping her with a suicidal mission to sneak on board the head Star Destroyer and cause enough chaos to give the rebels time to escape. And maybe they get captured and used by Snoke to lure Rey to their rescue, a la Cloud City. And during their inevitable escape, Finn could face down Phasma, thus finally freeing himself from his bondage. But maybe Finn still feels guilty about betraying the Resistance, which drives him to make the ultimate sacrifice at the end, only to be saved by Rose, who, despite knowing the possible consequences for the besieged rebels, just can't help herself because of all that lovey-dovey stuff that they'd actually bothered to hint at earlier in the script. And maybe we don't go to that stupid casino planet at all, and maybe we save Benicio del Toro for an entirely different movie. And then maybe some sort of culturally insensitive cartoon stereotype of an Irishman could sweep in and save the day with his massive laser sword, and then get to have a go with the Millennium Falcon as well. Just a thought. Personally, I thought the How It Should Have Ended team pretty much nailed it, so maybe we could have ended things a little more like this.
What did you think was going to happen? That I would take on the First Order with nothing but a laser sword?
Yes, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen.
That actually does sound pretty awesome. Okay, let's do it. This place is dead anyway.
I want every gun we have to fire on those two. Do it. That's impossible! He's never been seen having that force ability before.
Well, we have all seen you do that before, so it's not too crazy to think he can do this.
Shut up, Carl! Nobody asked you!
Now.
No! Bring me down. No! Come on!
What is with you and lightning all of a sudden?
While Finn's arc felt like a bolt-on from an entirely different movie, Maz Kanata's brief turn seemed to be beamed in straight from a Saturday morning kids cartoon spin-off. Maybe it was, and maybe its main purpose was to help promote Lucasfilm's Forces of Destiny web series, where Maz recants tales of do and daring by an exclusively female cast of characters from throughout the Star Wars franchise. Some suspect that Lupita Nyong'o's scene was as much to do with diversity quotas as it had to do with anything. And whatever the truth, her brief scene did seem entirely at odds with her character's portrayal in the first film. If it was primarily about diversity box ticking, then surely they could have easily added a bit of colour to the Rebel Alliance's predominantly white feminist command structure. And if the marketing department insisted they wedge the orange Yoda in somewhere, then the casino planet did seem to offer a fairly suitable opportunity. But most annoyingly, if they really had to phone a friend with an intimate knowledge of the universe's various scum, villainry and codebreakers, then there was another at least as suitably qualified applicant who was quite literally waiting for their call. Sadly, Rian Johnson said he couldn't think of a role for Billy D. Williams, which ironically meant that for all Disney's grandstanding about inclusion and diversity, black actors in prominent roles actually got less screen time in The Last Jedi than both episodes 5 and 6 of the original trilogy. Not that everyone was okay with that.
I have feelings, good, bad, and otherwise, about Star Wars, and I have a lot. I spent a whole
day talking about the whole Darth Vader situation. But
Really?
Oh.
You could?
Yeah, like the part where he was totally a black guy whose name basically was James Earl Jones,
Right.
and we were all, but while he was black, he was terrible and bad and awful and used to cut off white men's hands and didn't, actually claim his son. But as soon as he claims his son and goes over to the good, he takes off his mask and he is white. Oh yes, I have many feelings about that.
Still, at least Lupita might get something more to work with next time, unlike our next actor, whose character became a firm favourite almost as soon as she was cast.
So tell the fans what they want to hear, because I think everyone agrees that you were criminally underused in The Force Awakens. So are we going to see more Captain Phasma?
Phasma may not be the first Chrome Dome to make a disappointingly early exit, but she is the first to manage it twice in a row. Despite playing a prominent part of The Last Jedi's preceding trailers, she has even less lines than last time, turns up, has a quick fight, and then dies. Again, presumably. You have to admire Gwendoline Christie's commitment and seemingly genuine enthusiasm for the role, which promised so much and yet delivered so little. Either that or she really is a really, really good actress.
2 female cast members dominate this film. The characters are women, and that wasn't happening in 1977, was it?
No, and thank goodness it's happening now. And Ryan has such wonderful humour and puts you at real ease and invites collaboration. He wants to know what you think. He wants to know what you think about your story, what you think is happening, how you feel about the dialogue that's happening. And that's an incredible freedom to give an actor. And the idea that there is a female character who is encased in armour, and we primarily form a relationship with her due to her actions and her character, rather than the way she has been made flesh, was very interesting to me.
Incredibly, the one intriguing bit of character development we might have got to witness ended up being left on the cutting room floor. Despite having risen through the ranks of what essentially are a bunch of space Nazis, a major element of Phasma's persona is that she's being celebrated as a role model for young girls. And consequently, after watching the following outtake, you may find yourself wondering if they cut this scene because it could be interpreted as portraying the fans' favourite femme Nazi in a less than positive and empowering light.
It's a pretty good scene, which raises a couple questions about how she survived, because we know that this movie takes place the day after The Force Awakens, so she was put down the garbage chute of Starkiller Base and then it exploded, but she's back. So does it mean she got away? Like, how? It raises a lot of questions. Is Han Solo still alive? Who knows? Maybe they can pay off Harrison Ford enough money and he'll just crawl his ass back on the screen. The reason I like it is that Finn calls out Captain Phasma for killing some of her own men. And instead of her own men just blindly following her like bad guys would, they decide they're going to take her in and arrest her and or kill her. So she has to kill off all of her men on this elevated platform, and it is cool. Then they fight, Finn and Phasma. And the fight's alright. But what's really cool is that Finn chops off Phasma's hand and then throws her off this platform and kills her. It's a much better death than the stupid rebel scum line. That kind of stuff just feels forced to me. It doesn't feel organic. This one was kind of cool. I thoroughly endorse it. It's the best part of the movie you didn't get to see, and it's better than 99% of the actual movie that you paid to see. So Disney is hiding the best shit behind a paywall.
No doubt the action figures with the hand blaster that appears out of nowhere will have been selling by the crate load, unlike the ones for our next heroine, who got more lines than Phasma, but not in a good way.
And what's the deal with this Rose character? Why is she in this? Well, she's there so Finn can have someone to say funny things to, right? Makes sense. Also, at the end of the movie, Finn is gonna make this amazing self-sacrifice and save the day, and she swoops in and stops him. Why? Because she wanted a little kiss. Oh, that's cute, I guess. Yeah, and it really comes out of nowhere because there was no romantic chemistry there whatsoever. And she stops him from saving the day. Doesn't that put everybody's lives in danger? It does. I mean, Luke shows up and saves the day, but she didn't know that was gonna happen.
When reflecting on The Last Jedi's relative failure at the Chinese box office, Milo Yiannopoulos took great delight from proposing that critics had quickly identified it as being infested with something they call baijuo.
Baizuo, which is Baizuo.
Baizuo is the Chinese word for a naive, Western-educated person who advocates for political correctness only to satisfy their own feeling of moral superiority, and is essentially their equivalent to the term social justice warrior. Clearly such concepts truly are universal, and I suspect that Chinese critics will have regarded Rose Tico as part of the problem. Some suspect that Kelly Marie Tran's casting was specifically to do with Disney's determination to crack the lucrative Asian market. And while there may be some truth in this, I suspect that it could very well have had at least as much to do with a desire to reflect diverse demographics within their own domestic market. Personally, I applaud them for casting an Asian American actress, but given the story arc that they gave her to work with, it does become harder to outright reject suggestions that her role in the film is a clear example of Baizuo. According to Newsweek, while she's quickly become a firm fan favourite, there are unfortunately some losers even in the Star Wars fanverse. This followed reports that someone edited her character's Wikipedia page with various racist slurs and comments. Obviously such behaviour should quite rightly be condemned, but there does seem to be a consistent trend of deflecting any fault finding from the fans by simply dismissing it as racism or sexism from a small but vocal minority. And while there will inevitably always be a few absolute donuts, such claims can just as inevitably be conveniently over-egged. An early example of this followed the unveiling of the initial trailer for The Force Awakens and the revelation that black actor John Boyega would be playing a prominent role. Headlines soon after claimed that Twitter trolls had started a hashtag to boycott Star Wars over the casting of a black stormtrooper, which in turn led to Boyega, understandably enough, observing that the reaction to his appearance as a black stormtrooper did seem a bit prejudiced. The very first scene in the very first trailer certainly had some fans wondering if Disney intended to play the blindest bit of attention to anything that had come before, and I suspect that initial grumblings about a black stormtrooper had at least as much to do with the fact he wasn't Maori. A subsequent analysis of the boycott Star Wars Twitter hashtag that the headlines were based on concluded that 96% of people who contributed to it did so to express outrage over its very existence, and it transpired that even the people who started it were simply trying to get a rise, quite successfully, out of a generation of easily baited social justice warriors. I'm delighted for Tran if she has become a firm fan favourite, but such enthusiasm apparently hasn't extended to toy sales, and I suspect that more in-depth audience feedback may very well lead to a Jar Jar Binks sized backtrack for the finale. Either that or an online petition demanding that next time they don't set her up to fail. Because while Tran's character at least had the potential to have been an interesting and spunky addition to the story, for me, like many, her part will forever be tainted by her association with a pointlessly distracting subplot and the single most terrible moment in the history of Star Wars. Other than possibly inspiring a discussion about consent before kissing, the most positive thing I can say about Rose Tico is that based on other available evidence, I guess she could have been a whole lot worse.
And then follows the scene in which the whole film is fucked. Leia explains that there is a hidden old rebel base planet that is highly defendable, and the transport ships are all hidden too, so we can just move everyone there. And Purple Hair was doing the right thing the entire time. She simply failed to tell fucking anyone. She was doing the literal best thing ever for everyone, and she is sacrificing herself when they could have had any other pilot stay, and she just didn't mention any of this to the commander of their fucking fleet. A commander who is hot-headed and prone to solving problems himself. What the fuck, film? You are drunk.
So, a few fun facts about Vice Admiral Amelin Holdo. According to Wikipedia, She comes from a planet of space hippies who study astrology and value serenity above all things. As a rebellious teenager, she took to wearing frivolous gowns and dyeing her hair on natural colours in order to piss off her elders. She's bi, or more accurately, interspecies sexual. She has a quirky, eccentric personality, often getting distracted and speaking in riddles or metaphors. And as a starship commander, she expects her orders to be executed precisely and without question. Sounds like exactly the type of person you want rallying the troops in the middle of a crisis then. Possibly the most surprising revelation about Laura Dern's Vice Admiral Holdo is that Johnson revisited her scenes late in production in order to dial back her femininity and make her less condescending towards Poe, in the hope that the audience might have a shred of sympathy for her when she ultimately punches her ticket to Lightspeed. It's hard to think of a more annoying character in the history of Star Wars, and it's very easy to imagine that to a greater or lesser extent, Holdo was a very unsubtle middle finger to all the middle-aged fanboys. The Chewbacca defense makes more sense than Holdo's snooty, secretive, supercilious leadership style, which causes a calamitous chain of events leading to 2 entirely unnecessary wild goose chases, which in turn result in so many deaths that the entire remnants of the Rebel Alliance can comfortably fit in the Millennium Falcon. Such is the narrative impact of her relatively brief existence that Rian Johnson could have hit every other ball straight out of the park, and The Last Jedi would still have been a terrible, terrible movie. Ironically, but perhaps appropriately given her stereotypical fourth wave feminist credentials, by far the most annoying thing about Holdo is that she secures her time in the spotlight by elbowing out a much loved older sister, and consequently can also be blamed for the most what the funk moment of a very, very muddled movie.
So what else happens in the movie? Oh, well, there's a really powerful scene where Kylo Ren, with his shirt on, is gonna kill his mom, Leia, like he killed his father. Exactly, but at the last second, he stops himself. Wow. But then it's too late. Leia's command post is hit by another ship from the First Order. Incredible. Yeah, and we see her body floating through space, and it's a really beautiful end for the character, because you should have her fly back. What? Leia, have her fly back like Mary Poppins. But how? You know Mary Poppins? Yeah, I know Mary Poppins. Have her fly back like Mary Poppins. But how? She uses the Force, I don't know. Okay, I mean, I don't really have plans for her for the rest of the movie, but she could be in a coma, it's cool. Yeah, no, sure, I'll have her fly back like Mary Poppins. Awesome, thanks, I really like Mary Poppins.
Carrie Fisher sadly passed away in late December 2016. Various high-profile feminists and presumably Star Wars fans were quick to proclaim that she should be remembered first and foremost for her role as General Organa, the Great Leader, much more so than a plucky princess from almost 40 years ago in a galaxy far, far away. And yet few, if any, were heard complaining when it was revealed 12 months later that the Great General had been denied the opportunity to take command in what was to be her very last performance. Holdo's presence seemed a little pointless and more than a little problematic, but the oddest and most annoying thing about it was that it needlessly stole a significant amount of screen time away from Carrie Fisher. Given the available technology, Holdo's ultimate sacrifice also seemed a little pointless. But after Carrie Fisher's unexpected and tragic death, surely it must have occurred to someone that it also offered an obvious opportunity to properly honour Carrie Fisher's much-loved character. Given what Johnson clearly had in the can, a bit of tweaking in post-production could have allowed Princess Leia to go out in a blaze of glory by putting her in the pilot seat for the most visually memorable moments in the entire film. And how about this? They could even have fixed the grumbles some people have with that scene by having someone exclaim that given the complexity of hyperspace jumps, plotting a course to take out one, let alone half an armada of of starships was in fact a shot in a million, thus providing a sentimental callback to her brother destroying the Death Star in 1977 and hinting at Leia's strong connection to the Force, which all in all seems like a missed opportunity. And the greatest shame of all the shame about The Last Jedi is that Carrie Fisher's final role will instead be remembered for that scene and a permanent memorial of memes filed under the hashtag Carrie Poppins.
I am not going to explain why this is fucking stupid. I am simply going to show you how a normal person reacts to this scene.
Why even bother?
I had loved Star Wars since I was first shown it. I think I was around 6 years old when my family showed it to me, and I fell in love with the film. There were so many unusual elements, things that I didn't feel I'd seen before in other films. I remember even at that very young age seeing Princess Leia and being so in a state of rapture due to her strength, her wit, her determination, and thinking, that's unusual. I don't really see women like that in the things that I watch, even at that very young age, and thinking, I like it, and I like her, and I want to be like her.
There's too many dicks on the dance floor.
Too many dicks on the dance floor. Too many dicks on the dance floor. Too many dicks.
As fans of numerous pleasurable pastimes are increasingly finding, when confronted with a fair-weather whirlwind of social justice bijou, the safest course of action is probably to just sigh, batten down the hatches, and hope for the storm to pass, and that those most determined to push themselves into the centre of the action will eventually walk away once the dumpster fire of their creation has been well and truly lit. But again, I'll stress that despite all the front and backstage PC pandering, the main reason The Last Jedi is so bad it's almost good comes down to the plain and simple fact that the story is so confused. And it even fails in its aspiration to be a feminist movie, or at least the sort of feminism you'd want your family to embrace. Because aside from presenting us with a cacophony of hollow virtue signals and patronising poorly developed female characters, not to mention completely wasting their one ace already in the pack, the most heavy-handed theme that runs throughout the movie only serves to add weight to a worry that Emma Watson once brought to the UN.
I was appointed 6 months ago, and the more I've spoken about feminism, the more I have realised that fighting for women's rights has too often become synonymous with man-hating. If there is one thing I know for certain, it is that this has to stop.
The trope of competent women upstaging flawed, emotionally challenged men is undoubtedly a central and very conscious theme running throughout Episode 8. When approached with care, such concepts can make for compelling storytelling, but The Last Jedi is so clumsy that it sometimes comes across as a deliberate insult to a large cross-section of the film's intended audience. Plenty of opinioned opinionators have latched onto this aspect and concluded that the central villain of the piece is clearly intended to be so-called toxic masculinity. But having mansplained why I haven't been convinced by the faux feminization of Star Wars, I want to finish by setting out why I also think that the most redeeming characters are, ironically enough, cis white men. When the case is closed on the third and final Skywalker trilogy, it does seem likely that the last Skywalker still on the board will be remembered as the most interesting thing about it. His second act may not have been especially satisfactory, but Kylo Ren remains the most original of the new crop and seems better placed than anyone else to have had any sort of meaningful arc by the end of the closing chapter. That being said, I happen to think that it's the only other bloke still left in the toy box that comes out of The Last Jedi looking the best.
It seems like there's been an upholding of those original values of Star Wars, all the things that we love and we hold dear. but it's been brought right up to date and into the modern day in a way that everybody really seems to be applauding.
58, take 2. Take 3.
You're demoted.
If you find the female empowerment message a little too subtle for your liking, then the blooper reel on the DVD may be more to your taste, because just for laughs, we get to witness one particular manifestation of girl power being filmed over and over again. It seems pointless pointing out the obvious double standard, so I mainly present it as a visual metaphor for poor old Poe Dameron's treatment to date. He originally died a relatively uneventful death in the first third of The Force Awakens, only to be resurrected and retrofitted, first as a sort of secret love interest for Finn, and then again in The Last Jedi as the resident pale, stale, petulant male. He may very well be a cut and paste composite of parts of Han and Luke that were surplus to Rey's requirements. But the narrative that surrounds Poe Dameron in The Last Jedi is so muddled, not to mention mean-minded, that you have to admire him for simply sticking around as long as he has. And if we step back from the feminist gaze that Rian Johnson clearly wants to project onto him, a cold hard fact about Poe is that without him, The Last Jedi would be a very short movie indeed. So while it may have suited the clunky girl power theme for Leia to demote and humiliate her loyal servant, it also says something significant about the state of the Rebel Alliance's top brass. Because even if the Dreadnought had missed their shot, and Poe had followed the great general's order to retreat, it still would have been lights out for the Resistance less than 5 minutes later. And with the greatest respect to a much-loved character, I think it's fair to say that things haven't exactly gone swimmingly under her watch. Indeed, despite starting out from a considerably better position than her predecessor, their respective hard-working subordinates haven't exactly experienced equality of outcome. Then again, given all the problems caused by the dark side of her family, maybe that was her evil genius plan all along.
You know, sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to choke you without ever having to put a hand on you, just like Daddy did.
Given the stakes, it's not entirely unreasonable that Poe, like the audience, might begin to worry when Vice Admiral Gender Studies isn't exactly forthcoming with a plan. But again, even if we give Holdo a pass and allow Johnson his teachable moment about respect for authority, it still seems a bit harsh, not to mention more than a little sexist, to exclusively point to Poe for the unholy mess that undoubtedly follows the fact that various rebels didn't just get information. Indeed, the only reason Holdo inherits the very privileged opportunity to swan about snootily demanding blind allegiance was because a dirty dozen or so rebels had once expressly failed to follow orders from someone a lot like her. Is there a particular reason why we're invited to be okay with one and not the other, by the way? It's not necessarily fair to single out Oscar Isaac's excellent performance, because I do think the entire cast delivered and did their very best with what they'd been given, but he certainly deserves credit for making Poe interesting enough to save him from an early exit. And hopefully his character's legacy will be to remind the next generation of Star Wars fans that everybody deserves respect.
But I feel that this is what people want. The response from fans and the audience seems to be that this is what they like, this is what they want to see more of. And I do think that due to possibly the internet, people can be more vocal about what it is they want to see on their screens, and they seem to be saying they want to see something more diverse and representative of their societies.
When longtime fans exclaim that Star Wars is dead to them and The Last Jedi effectively ruined their childhood, obviously they don't intend for such outbursts to be taken quite as literally as some opinionated opinionators would like everybody else to think. With numerous future features currently in various stages of production, and having already survived George Lucas's own efforts to devalue the priceless gift he gave to everyone, I've little doubt that the Star Wars franchise will survive the Kennedy era as well. Disney clearly have decade-spanning ambitions for their expanding Star Wars universe, and no doubt at least some of it, at some point, will be worth a return visit. And even those smugly laughing at the sexist man-babies crying over their broken childhood will themselves someday have to come to terms with why it is such concepts give their own lives such meaning. Aside from selling the rest of us a shoddy product infested with plot holes and baijuo, Disney have reneged badly on the psychological contract they gleefully handed to an aging generation of fans. Having offered us all a once-in-a-lifetime ticket to see the band back together, they gave them a measly support slot and dismissed their audience as bigots. When we started booing the second-rate cover band, they insisted it was our civic duty to cheer. And like numerous other recent examples of feminist baijuo cultural appropriation, the greatest shame about Ray and Chums is that they have brought considerable disharmony and division to a universe that already had diversity and genuine concepts of social justice written into its very DNA. Star Wars, as the very name suggests, is essentially a war movie, and a Second World War movie at that. And although everything that has ever followed is largely thanks to the efforts, imagination, and risks taken by a small group of people, predominantly but by no means exclusively consisting of men, it was always intended to belong to everyone. I'm happy that a significant sized audience appeared to love The Last Jedi, and in fairness, those involved did manage to get quite a lot of things right. But for me, like many, it fails on so many levels. It fails as both a sequel and a standalone story, and it fails to set up whatever is supposed to come next. It fails in its feminism, and it fails its core fan base, and worst of all, it fails to understand or embrace the inclusive spirits that originally gave Star Wars such universal appeal.
Then we have Rose, the true hero of the rebellion, and she scanned for $1. Talk about a bargain. Her useless sister Paige, well, she's $1 too, so nothing new there. Now, let's scan something else, this large-sized Rey action figure, because Rey is in high demand. She scans for a whopping $1.10. I can't believe people didn't pay full price for this.
Watch out! You might get what you're after. Cool babies, strange but not a stranger. I'm an ordinary guy, burning down the house. Hold tight, wait till the party's over. Hold tight, we're in for nasty weather. There has got to be a way, burning down the house.
But what Lucasfilm wants to do is say the fans are sexist. The fans are intimidated by women. We've all heard that, right? But I will say again, I'm going to go back to Rian Johnson, Mr. Rian Johnson, who point blank said we need less white dudes in Star Wars. Your words, not mine. If you believe that, Rian Johnson, if you truly want to see this change, then be the difference you claim you want to see. Step aside, bring in Ryan Coogler, bring in Antoine Fuqua, bring in F. Gary Gray, bring in Patty Jenkins, bring anybody else besides you. And I promise you, you'll make us all happy and you'll be doing the thing that you claim you believe. But I highly doubt that's going to happen because you're nothing more than a Hollywood lunatic.
Here's your ticket, pack your bags, time for